because they believe that they've got a full hotline to God and will not be shaped or will not listen to other people speaking into their lives. So in answer to your question, one of the key things is this idea of being in community and allowing people to speak into you, making yourself vulnerable.
Right. But if we're, as you did at the beginning, you said all the basis of discipleship comes from learning, teaching.
Yes.
That, because the very basis of that word then also presupposes that, yes, we are together in community, and that means living in community. I mean, as we know from family life and building up from there, doesn't always mean getting your own way. It means that you have to think of other people, etc.
Yes.
And so very much that in the church. That's part of it. But is there a part of it which is also very necessary, that we have clear teaching?
Yeah.
In whatever form. I'm not just talking about the guy at the front preaching. I mean, it can be in any form, but it does presuppose that as well, that discipleship has to come down to that.
Yeah, definitely. And the use of the scriptures, of course, is integral and key to the development of any person who says that they follow Jesus. The Old Testament scriptures were very important to Jesus. He believed them fully. He committed them to memory. He quoted them at appropriate times. He knew how to handle them. Likewise, so should we. Since the time of Jesus, the New Testament has been revealed to us, and we should engage, learn, appreciate, get into ourselves, whether we listen to the CD in the car or get the latest study Bible. All those sorts of things.
Or watch Revelation TV.
Or watch Revelation TV. And of course, because we're placed into a community, God has put people in that community, people who are prophets, evangelists, carers and shepherds and encouragers, this whole realm, and we slot into that. So yeah, we must not only learn from these other people, and sometimes in a very specific one-to-one way, just as Jesus discipled his 12 and the inner group of 3, and Paul had certain people he travelled with, spent a lot of time inputting. But the other side of the coin is that we too bring, and the Christian life is not, I'm a drain pipe poured into me. There is this sense of interacting. I bring my gifts and abilities and encouragement to the table to benefit others as well.
But how do we know that we have the right teaching? I mean, because I mean, I often get phone calls, and Revelation TV often gets phone calls from somebody that says, I live such and such a place. Can you recommend me a good church where I can get good teaching? And that presupposes, and in a number of cases it's true, some cases they've never been to church before, but in other cases they've come to see that where they are, the teaching isn't all that it should be. So presumably the level of discipleship that you're going to get is very much dependent on the teaching that you're given. How can we know that we're getting good and right teaching? What should we be looking for?
Indeed. Well, it's what the teaching produces. Because you
By
can
their
have
fruits you should know them.
You can have sound teaching, which is orthodox, mainstream, which produces nothing much in particular, because all it is about is the preacher having his set 45 minutes, and that is the centre of the Christian life. Produces very passive congregations. What you need to find is someone who is mainstream, orthodox. That's probably a different programme, unless you want to press that now.
No, we'll go down there.
Someone who is
time.
mainstream, someone who is orthodox, believes the Bible, and produces with his teaching godliness rather than pride. So, for instance, there are some groups that will produce pride in their people because we have got this truth. This is what God has given us, hasn't given it to anybody else. And that's a horrific thing. And you can smell it sometimes, you can sort of feel it in the air. So you're looking for groups of Christians, communities of Christians who are serving and loving. Because, of course, after a deep theological study for many years, after reading big books with small print with Hebrew and Greek in them, after having bought so many Bibles, my shelves bend under the weight of the books and Bibles and stuff I've got. I've come to the really intellectual, academic, theological conclusion that the two key things in the Christian life are to love God and to love each other.
Yeah. Now, couldn't you have found that just from the scriptures in the first place?
I probably could, but like everybody, I'm fallen, and I don't work properly, so it took me a few years to get to that point.
But it is important that we do, however we find it, and whether we need to put, as I say, a game with a CD or a game with a series on TV or somewhere else, we need to have that teaching, don't we? We need to expose ourselves to that, to produce, because when I first become a Christian, when I first enter into this pathway as a Christian, I don't really know what the Lord expects of me. I give myself to Him. I say, "Here I am, Lord," but I don't really know what He expects of me at that point. And that has to grow, and that has to develop, doesn't it?
And it is so important that we should birth new Christians in the atmosphere of Jesus is the centre of this, not them. We will make a fuss of them when they come to faith, when they repent, when they get baptized or whatever. But it is Jesus who is at the centre, and we are becoming part of His story, His big plan. And it isn't about me. It isn't about, so many Christians get a bit obsessive about, what they're supposed to do. Or just love people, serve people, get out there and give yourself away. Tell people about Jesus, be communicative about your faith. Don't get so wrapped up in wondering about, whether God wants you to go to the left-hand side of the road or to catch the number 23 bus. Because Christians do it, Doug. They do it.
I was just thinking back in my life, thinking of the times I've done that as well.
Yeah. So I think it is such an important part of our life in following Jesus and being a disciple, in walking in our salvation, that we work out that salvation with a sense of awe of God in it, but that we work it out and we walk it out in a very, very practical way. Because it's interesting that when Jesus talks about believing and loving Him, He's really simple. It's John 14:23. I came across this verse in my late teens. And He says, if you love me, you will obey my teaching.
Yes,
You'll obey my teaching.
Yeah.
That's what it says. If you love me, you'll obey my teaching. So how do I know I love God? Because I worship with my hands in the air? I do, okay? But no. That's just what you do with your hands.
Yeah.
You do what He says. So we have to learn what He says. We have to immerse ourselves in Jesus and clearly work with others who are further along the path than we are.
Somebody watching today and saying, okay, I hear what you say, and yes, I've made what I feel was a definite decision. I've repented and moved on, and my life has started. But I'm not sure I'm a disciple. I mean, because we don't often use this terminology. Of course, people can be Christians, and you can be Baptist, Methodist, and Pentecostal, and anything else you want. But you don't very often get this title given to people that you're a disciple. Therefore, maybe they don't know that they are a disciple, and they're sitting there thinking, well, how do I know? What are the hallmarks of a disciple? If I really am a disciple, what will that mean in my life, JT?
Well, firstly, I'll just say this, that in Acts 11, it says that the Christians were first called disciples at Antioch. Not. It actually says the disciples were first called Christians at Antioch.
Yeah.
So Christian is a description of what disciples are. And even though the word Christian has been hijacked either to mean someone born in Britain, just like I was born in a pub, which I was, it didn't make me a pint of best bitter. Just because you're born in Britain doesn't make you a Christian, or a Christian country or whatever. The word Christian has been hijacked to refer to having run down the front of a meeting or said a prayer when you were 12. No, it refers to those who are disciples of Jesus. So coming back to the question, what is a disciple of Jesus? And the really simple answer is if you love him, if you're seeking to put him first in your life, so that when you're making decisions about marriage, about where you live, about what you spend your money on, what you do with your time, if Jesus is first in your thinking, if his will, his desires, his purpose, his plans are at the forefront, you, my friend, are his disciple. That's what a disciple of Jesus is.
And so it's not so much what you do, it's what you are. Is that what you're saying?
No. What I'll say is this, is that your faith in Jesus, and people often don't recognize this, that faith is visible. Faith is actually observable. Because if you remember Jesus, we told the story in the Gospels of some guys who broke up a roof and lowered a disabled friend into a meeting room where Jesus was. And it says in the passage, Jesus seeing their faith. Jesus seeing their faith, and he spoke to them and to the man. So James, who was Jesus' half-brother, says that he would show me someone who says they have faith without works. And then he said, well, I will show you my faith by what I do. So people who have faith, people who put their trust in Jesus, will indeed do. It's not the root, but it's certainly the fruit. And I wonder if we ask questions like, well, can I be a disciple of Jesus, or can I be a Christian and not forgive people? I know what the answer is to that. Most of us would gag before we actually say the real answer, which is no. Because there is two very clear verses in the Bible. If you do not forgive others, and we've got to live with it because Jesus said it, you will not be forgiven. And disciples seek to forgive. Disciples seek to follow Jesus.
So once again, we're here at a process, aren't we? We're talking about learning from him. We're talking about being followers of the way, which was also talked about. No, because what is interesting is, for instance, I mean, looking back 40-odd years to the night that I became a Christian.
Was it that long ago?
47 years, a couple of weeks ago.
I thought it was about 10 years ago.
No, well, thank you. I haven't grown that much. I'll talk with you afterwards. But with that, I mean, what that night, for instance, I wouldn't have known those scriptures. Okay, I wouldn't have known that the Bible said, "If you don't forgive, I will not forgive you." No. So at that point, God couldn't hold that, as it were, against me. But it must therefore be followers of him. And again, you've said, a disciple is someone, if you love me, you will do as I have said. So in other words, it's growing, it's going on. And as there is revelation from it, as I'm reading his word and that revelation comes into my heart, then at that point, I'm responsible for whether I obey or disobey that. Is that what we're saying?
To whom much is given, much is expected. And the converse is true, that if you've only had a little bit of revelation, the expectation upon you obviously would be less. But, you know, many of us were birthed incorrectly anyway. And I was told just to believe. I don't even remember repenting of any terrible sins that I'd done when I was 12 years old. I don't think there were many, but there were quite a few.
Have you done any by that time?
And for me, the whole, I know we talked about this last time, but the whole process of coming to faith was stretched over like 12 years. Well, that was wrong. So it took me a lot longer to actually be born properly before I actually started toddling, you know. Likewise, the path of salvation until we, receive the full salvation that's due to us, which actually will reach its fruition when we're resurrected from the dead. It's not when we die and go to heaven. That's for the next program. But it's when we're resurrected from the dead. So between now and then, we grow.
Mm.
We grow in our faith. Paul